Welcome back to Catastrophe Chronicles, the podcast where disasters take center stage, whether they want to or not.
And tonight, we're turning up the heat.
In this episode, we're diving into the Station Nightclub fire of 2003, a night that started with pyrotechnics and ended with one of the deadliest fires in U.S. history.
Let's just say the fire marshal wasn't on the guest list.
From foam soundproofing that burned faster than a cheap candle, to an overcrowded club where standing room only was more like standing room barely. This is a story of a preventable tragedy and glaring safety failures.
Great White learned the hard way that no encore is worth this much smoke.
Get ready to fan the flames as we dive into the tragedy, the fallout, and the scorched lessons that still burn bright today. Hi guys, welcome back. I hope everyone who celebrates American Thanksgiving had a good Thanksgiving. We had our taco giving, which is always fun. This is going to be posting, I think, like a week after Thanksgiving, but still, I hope you celebrate you had a good one.
Yep, happy Turkey Day.
Happy Turkey Day.
Or Taco Day.
So tonight we're going to be covering the 2003 Station Nightclub fire. Have you heard of that one at all, Aaron?
I have not.
This is a really wild one. And there's a couple of things I just kind of wanted to talk about before we got going. Number one, we always do cocktails. The band that was playing at the Station Club was Great White.
Great White, okay.
The band Great White. So for our cocktail tonight, I made shark bites. Because I am who I am as a person, and it made me laugh. Yep, and I have not let Aaron get started on the drink because with shark bites, for those of you who don't know, it's this like really pretty blue margarita. And then you have grenadine. You usually have grenadine in a shark that you pour into it. I did not want to buy sharks, so we have grenadine in shot glasses. And you and I need to pour the grenadine into our margs and make them shark bites.
Awesome. Let's go.
Let's go. And you see the grenadine spreads through like shark blood in the ocean. So it's a shark bite.
I love it.
Aren't those silly? So yeah, we are having shark bites. I will post the recipe on the website after this episode. So the Station Nightclub fire, the Station fire. This was a fire that happened in a nightclub, and it really, the whole time I was researching it, and I had heard about it before this, but while I was digging deeper into it than I have before, I was really thinking about all the concerts I went to when I was younger.
Oh, yeah.
Especially the one you and I went to. Remember when we saw Real Big Fish at the, what was it?
The House of Blues
House
in
of
San Diego.
Blues. House of Blues in San Diego. And they had really well-marked exits. I never felt unsafe. But reading through this, I realized just this kind of stuff can happen to anyone. You really don't know if it's going to be really bad until you know it's really bad. And there are little things we can look for, and, you know, you and I are going to talk about that through the course of the episode. But fires, structure fires, are just absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I can think of a number of things that I would rather be doing than stuck in a structure fire.
Seriously, because they get so hot. They're so much worse than you ever really think about on a day-to-day basis, which we're going to go over in this. But they're scary. And
not as fun as the song.
What song?
The Roof. The Roof. The Roof is on fire.
No, they're definitely not as much fun as the song.
But you bring up that concert that we went to, the Real Big Fish concert.
Yeah.
That was so much fun.
That was such a great concert. We had a really good time. And we weren't worried about fires.
No, we weren't. We were just worried about the opening band singing Sublime, but not singing Sublime.
Yeah, so the band we saw, they started playing the chords from Santeria. It sounded exactly the same.
It wasn't just the chords. They were playing the music from Santeria, but the singer was singing a different song that one they wrote.
But the entire club burst out in
Santeria.
I don't practice. And you could see the performer. He was so mad that we were all singing the wrong song.
But he couldn't stop because the show must go on.
The show must go on. But, you know, again, none of us were thinking about fire. Just like no one at the Station Nightclub was thinking about fire. You're never thinking about fire when you're at a show. But this episode is going to show you should be thinking about fire.
Now I'm just going to be terrified.
I'm low-key always terrified. Have you ever noticed that when we go places with the kids, I always park us right next to emergency exits? This is why. When it's just you and me, I'm less worried about it because I don't know. I guess you and I can die and that's fine.
Or it's easier to get us out than us and 4 children.
That too. But yeah, it's something I do think about, partially because I I love reading about disasters and whatnot, but just in general, it's a good thing to think about. So I have a great quote this week.
Lay it on me.
It's going to be a killer show. That's the whole quote.
That's the whole quote. It's going to be a killer show.
It's going to be a killer show. That is Jack Russell, the lead singer of Great White, on February 20th, 2003. Spoken hours before his performance at the station, which was cut short by a fire that caused the death of 100 patrons.
I mean, he wasn't wrong.
He wasn't wrong. And that is the same way the book Killer Show starts, which was an amazing book that I read for research for this podcast. And I feel like everything about the Station Club fire needs to start with, it's going to be a killer show.
I like it.
So we're going to West Warwick, Rhode Island.
Okay.
West Warwick, Rhode Island it's a post-milling town. It has seen its glory days and it's kind of running down. It's not bad. It's not a terrible area of town, but it's blue collar. It's more working class. There's not a lot of money there. It's lower end neighborhood, right? It's also Rhode Island. And Rhode Island, it's the smallest state. So it's a smaller town in a small state. Everyone kind of knows one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
West Warwick wasn't any stranger to fire before this happened. Mill fires are pretty horrific because mills are built, with wood, and this wood has been soaked in years and years and years of oils. So when a mill goes up in flames, it really goes up in flames. It's just a huge
and all the
burn.
sawdust, and it's just
And they had a couple of really notable ones. In 1821, the Roger Williams Mill burned down. In 1992, the Crompton Mills burned down. There was also a string of over 20 arson cases in the 90s that were never solved.
Oh, there were over 20 of these arson cases.
These are separate from the mill fires. There was 20 arson cases at random places that were never solved in the 1990s. There were so many fires in West Warwick that one of the local neighborhoods actually changed its name to Phoenix after the mythological creature rising from the flames. Right?
Good.
That's where we are, West Warwick. On 211 Cowsett Avenue, there was a little business. It was about 4,400 square feet. When it was first made, it was a Navy bar in World War II. Then it became the Red Fox restaurant and then the Cedar Acres restaurant. It was called Tammany Hall at one point and was pretty rugged. There was bullet holes in the coolers, apparently.
All right.
I think it was not super friendly until Brillo Villanova bought the place. He made it P. Brillo and Sons. It was an Italian restaurant. It was apparently pretty good. Villanova ultimately decided he no longer wanted to run restaurants, but he didn't want to sell the property, so he started renting it out. When he started renting it out, it went through a slew of just dive bars. It was Glenn's Pub, it was Cracker Jack's, and then finally it became the filling station. In 1995, Howard Julian bought it. While Howard Julian owned it, at one point, one of the maintenance workers was changing a light bulb and he looked up into the rafters and noticed that the rafters were just charred. There had already been fires at this place. They had just been covered up.
They just didn't fix any of the damage?
I mean, I assumed that it was still at least mostly structurally sound, but there was clearly fire damage that those rafters hadn't been replaced. They were still charred, covered in charcoal. If you rubbed your hand against it, it came off black.
Super safe.
Super safe. The neighbors hated the filling station. One neighbor in particular, Barry Warner, really hated it. They thought it was too loud. They weren't doing much to soundproof it. They weren't doing much of anything, but they had a lot of live shows. Everything from third-rate national acts like Great White to local tribute bands, local musicians, whatnot.
Okay.
But it was a dive bar with live music. I mean, we've all been to them. We've all seen them. We all know what they are. The neighbors complained constantly. So the city came after Julian constantly. And eventually Julian, we're not totally sure where he found it, but he found this white foam that felt like pool noodles. And he glued 192 square feet of it around the stage area.
Okay.
Eventually, in some of the court cases that came out, he said that he found it in the dumpster.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. But we're not totally sure. We're not totally sure.
I found this in the dumpster.
Yeah. The name...
Up to code.
It was... The name eventually was just shortened to the station, and that was just kind of a natural progression. Now, the station, when you look at it from the street, right in the middle is the entryway. The entryway is double doors, and then it's got that split entry where one side of it goes against the building and is a handicap ramp. The other side is stairs, and in front of it is a safety rail. So when you come out or go in, you have to go around. You can't just walk right out the door. When you go into the building, you go through the double doors into a hallway. There's a ticketing desk right at the end of it. But when you go into the hallway, it kind of narrows like a triangle into a single door. That door is only 33 inches wide.
So it's a small door.
It's a small door. And it's kind of like a ramp. It's slightly tilted down. So when you're walking in, you're walking up. When you're walking out, you're walking down.
Okay.
To the left of that entry hallway is the bar area. It's a giant horseshoe bar. There's one door off of that area, one exit. But that exit was not well marked, largely because no one wanted anyone to sneak into the bar without permission for shows.
Makes sense.
So we've got 2 exits now. If you went behind that, behind the bar area, there's the kitchen. The kitchen had a door to the outside, but that door was not really visible to any patrons. Behind that, there's a whole bunch staff only. There's a whole bunch of offices and stuff behind that, and there's the bathroom, the rear bar, just a kind of catch-all area. There used to be an emergency exit by the bathrooms, but that emergency exit was boarded up. So right now we've got 3 exits. If you're going into the club and you turned right instead of left, you would find yourself on the dance floor. And on the dance floor against the far side of the wall, there was a stage that was about 2 feet high and a drummer's alcove that stuck off of it. Directly in front of that, so on the street level, was an atrium, so like the big bar room for a restaurant.
Okay.
While it was a bar, they put pool tables and stuff there. During shows, they'd move it out of the way. Oh, and right next to the stage, there's a door too. So there's 4 exits on this place. One of them is a really narrow choke point. The stage door actually had 2 doors. They weren't next to each other. They were one right on top of another. One of them opened in and one of them opened out.
So like a airlock kind of thing?
Kinda. I don't know why it was there in time. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about why it was probably like that, but it was 2 doors. You had to open 2 doors to get outside. So there's 4 emergency exits on this place.
None of them seem great, though.
None of them seem great. We're going to go over more of the problems with that later. In the words of Stephen Scaparetti, this bar was a place where good bands go to die.
Oh.
That's starting out well.
So many, like the double meaning on that.
Yep. So in March 2000, the Dadarian brothers bought the club. Now, the Dadarian brothers were 2 guys. There was Michael Dadarian, who was a really rich businessman. He had yachts, he had cars, he had a mansion, he was a rich guy buying things, trying to make a quick buck. And then we have Jeff Dadarian, who was a reporter for a Boston news station. Shortly after they bought the club, Jeff Dadarian actually did a news story called In Case of Emergency. That was all about fire safety.
Yeah, apparently it didn't catch on.
Oh, you're going to love them by the end of this. Now, the Dadarian brothers, they were cheap, absolute cheapskates. They paid basically everyone under the table. They owned a couple of businesses. So in the nightclub arena, that's not super uncommon, but they paid everyone that worked for them pretty much under the table to avoid paying taxes and avoid paying workman comp insurance. Super awesome. They would routinely not pay what they had promised for bands, particularly like those tribute bands and local bands. At one point, they had this giant rock mural painted across the front of the station, and they told the artist that they weren't going to pay him the full amount, so he just stopped painting halfway through John Lennon. And rather than paying him the right amount, they painted a pair of glasses on John Lennon and made him Ozzy Osbourne. They also were liars. They would routinely tell the bands that were going to come and play for them that their occupancy level was much higher than it actually was. When they really started having bands come in, their occupancy level was 317. It was eventually up to 404, which we're going to get into real soon. Not good. But they would tell bands that their occupancy was 500, 550, 600 people. Again, 4,400 square foot building. Not all of that is stage floor and things like that. That's the whole building. Every part of it, the bathrooms, the kitchen, the bar, the offices, 4,400 square feet. So we mentioned Barry Warner. Barry Warner lived across the street. He was one of the neighbors who hated how loud these guys were. And when they bought the place, the city told them, look, if we keep getting noise complaints, we're probably going to pull your entertainment license. So you really need to figure this out. So the Dadarian brothers decided, we're going to go over and we're going to have a chat because Barry Warner is the most vocal of everyone. And we're going to try and, work this out. They went over, had the most, what I would imagine was the most awkward conversation of all time. They started with, look, you don't need to call the cops if we're too loud. Just call us. We'll make it quieter.
Sure.
They offered to buy him an air conditioner so that he could shut his door and not get all of the noise coming in. And then they told him, we're going to, look into some other soundproofing because maybe we can do better than Julian did. And when they said that, Barry Warner really perked up. And he told him, well, I work for American Foam. I could sell you some foam. You could use that for the soundproofing. And they thought that sounded great because not only are they going to put some money in Barry's pocket, they also get to soundproof. And with Barry having been the one that provided it, hopefully he'll complain less. So they were all over it. They ordered 25 53-foot by 7-foot foam sheets of polyurethane foam. There was a fire retardant option, but it came out later that Barry Warner never offered it. No one at the company offered it. So they bought the not flame retardant version. This was like egg crate foam. The foam that was already on the walls had the consistency of like pool noodles. It was very stiff. This is like packing material.
Right.
And they glued it everywhere. They glued it all over, all around the stage, all through the drummer's alcove. When I was telling you about those double doors, they glued it on the inner of the 2 double doors, all over the ceiling. They didn't glue it in the bar area, but pretty much everywhere where the music was going to be and the dancing was going to be was covered in this egg crate foam and then painted black.
Just to add to
They put glitter on it too.
Flammability.
Glitter.
Oh, so it's sparkly flames.
They're sparkly flames. So Jeff Derderian, less than a year after installing this, again, polyurethane foam, about 10 months before the fire, did a news story on foam mattresses and their fire dangers. One of the quotes from his report was, "Another problem is what's inside the mattress. Polyurethane foam. Fire safety experts call it solid gasoline. It can cause a smoldering mattress to burst into flame."
Does he not know what he bought?
He knows. He's been told.
Okay.
He clearly didn't make the connection or didn't care.
Right.
I don't think either matters. Either way, he's kind of a douchebag. The brothers, a couple of years into owning the club, decided they were kind of over it. The club was not making much money, so they were trying to sell it by the time the fire started. They originally tried to sell it to the Machados, who was a husband and wife couple, and they told them that in order to see the Bucks, you're going to have to give us a $20,000 deposit. So the Machados gave a deposit. And when they saw the books, they also found out that the Derderian brothers didn't own the building. Villanova owned it.
What?
So they were not buying the building. They thought they were buying the building and the business because that's what the Derderian brothers had led them to believe. And then they found out, nope, they don't own the building. They're just buying the business. But they've already given them this deposit for $20,000 when they found that out.
Oh, my God.
So they tried to pull out. And the Derderian brothers, being ever cheap, told them, no, not until we have another buyer. Pretty sure that's not legal.
No.
But that's what happened. A couple months later, Michael O'Connor decided he wanted to try and buy the club. So they were going all into it. They actually got as far as having a pre-purchase agreement. He had given them a $19,000 deposit. Plan was for O'Connor to come on the 20th to see the club in action when a national act, Great White, was performing.
Okay.
He came that night. He saw the pre-acts. He saw the money coming in. He thought it was a great purchase. He left about 30 minutes before the fire started with the plan of finalizing the sale the next day. Kind of bananas to me. That guy, he made it. He got lucky. So let's get back to the foam and some of the issues in the building. This building had a lot of issues. Dennis LaRocque was the last person to calculate the capacity, the maximum capacity that the building could hold. He was the fire marshal that was in charge of it. The Rhode Island Fire Code mandates that places of public assembly have to provide a certain number of square feet per occupant, depending on how that space is used. This building, their occupancy levels had changed over the years because what it was had changed over the years. When the Derderian brothers bought it, they had it reassessed to see how many people they could fit in. And on December 30th, 1999, so again, this is right as part of their purchase agreement, Dennis LaCroix said they could move it, they could up it from 258 to 317 as long as they removed all tables and chairs from the area.
Okay.
This gave people 7 square feet of standing room per person in that main performance area. 2 months later, though, in February 2000, Michael Derderian called him up and asked, hey, can you look again and find a way to make it 400 people? LaRocque did it. He came in, he looked around, he raised the building's limit to 404 when all tables and chairs were removed, as long as a uniformed firefighter was privately hired by the club for any events utilizing that many people.
I'm sure they never hired one.
This is also not allowed in the fire code. There's absolutely nothing in the fire code that says you can increase the max occupancy and lower the amount of square footage each occupant needs by hiring a firefighter. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
It's not legal. On top of that, the way he calculated it is he gave 5 feet per person by designating the entire building as standing room only.
Oh.
So the offices, the kitchen, the cooler, the cellar downstairs, every piece of the building is now standing room only.
That's dumb.
404 people in the dance area where people would be standing for the performances is the equivalent of putting 404 people on half of a basketball court.
Oh, God.
It is beyond crowded and absolutely unacceptable. While he was doing this nonsense, he was also routinely doing fire inspection checks to make sure that everything was up to code. He would pretty routinely cite them for minor issues, but he never did cite them for the foam. He was there multiple times after the foam had been put up, and he never cited them for it. He never mentioned it in any of his things. Part of the Rhode Island Fire Code requires that fire marshals, when any kind of soundproofing like that is put up, that they take a strip of it and they do what's called a flame test. And for the flame test, they're supposed to take 8 inches, hold it up, set it on fire. If the fire doesn't spread more than 4 inches in 12 seconds, it's considered okay.
Okay.
The foam that they used, if the flame test had been done, the entire 8 inches would have gone up in 4 seconds.
Yeah.
So if he had done what he was supposed to do, that foam would have been taken down. The last inspection that Dennis LaRocque did was on November 20th, 2002. It was about 3 months before the disaster. One of the things he cited, again, I'm going to remind you, he said that he didn't see the foam. One of the things he cited was
the
that
foam that was
indoor...
stapled or glued to everything?
It gets worse. The door, remember I told you there was 2 doors, one right on top of another.
Mm-hmm.
The interior door swung inward. That was one of the things he cited them on. That's not allowed to have a emergency exit door swing inward like that.
Right.
That door was covered completely in the foam. In order to open the door, you had to actually reach through the foam to get to the handle.
Oh my God.
And he said in his report that he opened the door. So he literally had to reach into the foam, put his hand into it to get that door open. And he cited them on that, but said nothing about the foam. So let's talk about Great White. Great White was kind of a one-hit wonder in the 80s. They're a hair band. Think Kiss with pyrotechnics and makeup and hair and everything. Their big hit was the song Once Bitten, Twice Shy.
Oh my God. Okay.
Which one do you think it is?
What do you mean? What do I think it is?
Sing the song that you think it is.
Oh, wait, no, I'm thinking of the other one.
You're thinking of Wham! Because that's what I thought for ages, that it was the Christmas song from Wham! I've been sitting here thinking for years and years of hearing of this story that they were the ones that sang the freaking Christmas song. And I was thinking, wow, that's not really 80s hair band. That's not the right one. I'll play the right one for you later.
Okay.
Look up Once Bitten, Twice Shy on the radio. It's definitely metal. 80s hair band metal. But that's their one hit wonder. The band had broken up. They were definitely third tier at this point. There was only 2 members of the original band touring, Jack Russell and Mark Kendall. Okay. Everyone else who was performing were what's called session musicians. And session musicians are musicians who get paid a salary and they're not officially affiliated with the band. And the reason for that is in order for a band to tour under their original name, you have to have at least 2 members. If they made those session musicians official members of the band, they could then take the name Great White and go tour. And they didn't want them to be able to do that. So they had session musicians. Jack Russell was broke as fuck. Okay. He started this tour largely because he had just declared bankruptcy. And they took everything. They took his sounding equipment. They took all of his stuff. They took all $7,000 he had in the bank account. And everyone was asking for money. Damn. I'm going to repeat that. $7,000. That's all he had.
Yeah, he broke.
Even his dentist was going after him for $160.
Oh my God.
This poor man was broke and he was trying to reap in some money. It wasn't making much. He only made about $5,000 from each performance. But he was doing the thing. He was trying. 80s metal hair bands are really known for their pyrotechnics. And think like Kiss, where they've got all the sparks and stuff going off on stage. Pyrotechnics were routinely used at the club. There were multiple bands that had used them. In fact, the road manager of Great White, Dan Beachel, had used pyrotechnics with a different band just a couple months before at the station. Okay. So this was a normal thing. Should it have been normal? Absolutely not. This was a small venue. They should not have been using pyrotechnics. But they were. In order to use pyrotechnics, not only is the person who's using them supposed to have a license,
right?
Which Don Fischel did not have. They're supposed to have training, which he did not have. You're also supposed to get a permit from the fire marshal, which they did not get. Part of getting the permit is you're supposed to show the fire marshal what you're doing, on top of having a safety plan, things like, having a fire extinguisher near the pyrotechnics.
Small things.
Which they did not have, just so we're all aware. This show, though, was a really exciting thing for the town. All of the local radio stations were hyping it up. It was being sponsored by Budweiser. Do you remember? Actually, Well, you might. In 2003, Budweiser was having this big, like, gimme campaign where they were doing birthday beer, where it was like they put the date that it was brewed on. And
Oh,
it
yeah.
was going straight to you. It was during that time, and this was one of their many, many things that they were doing to promote that. So it was everywhere. The whole town was super excited about Great White coming. Because again, small town, dive bar. This is probably the closest thing they get to rock royalty.
Right.
Coming to town. So when they rolled in, it was a lot like Jesse James walking into the saloon.
Okay.
And Jack Russell was eating it up. The morning of the show, he went to Denny's to have breakfast with a couple of people. And while he was at Denny's, there was a construction crew. One of the guys in the construction crew was Rick Sonetti, who was legitimately a big Great White fan. He actually proposed to his wife with the lyrics from one of their songs, Save Your Love.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he was psyched to meet Jack Russell and to meet the band. Jack Russell comped him tickets, told him, call up the bar, tell him that you're coming, that you're my guest, you can come for free. Let him in. That was one of the places that he told him, it's going to be a killer show.
Right.
You got to come. It's going to be a killer show. And he invited the entire construction crew. He also went and got a tattoo that day, which he was super excited about. He wanted to get a new tattoo, I guess. And while he was
commemorate the event,
he went to the tattoo shop Doors of Perception, and he was tattooed by Scott Green. And Scott Green was real excited about it because he had always wanted to tattoo a rock star.
Okay.
He had to tattoo a rock star. And he ended up inviting Scott Green, a couple of other people that were in there. I mean, he invited everyone. He invited housekeepers from the inn that he was staying at. He had a huge list of guests. It was at the point when I was reading the book and doing research that I was kind of wondering who the hell paid to go inside, because he's just inviting everyone and putting them on the list. So the town's excited. By the time show's around, it was later figured out that 462 people showed up for this event. The 404 maximum occupancy was already inflated, and they were above that by quite a bit. 462 people. A couple of days before this disaster happened, on February 17th, there was another disaster. At a nightclub in Chicago, a fight broke out, and in kind of a misguided attempt to break it up, one of the security guards sprayed the people with pepper spray.
Oh, God.
And people ran for it. And the only way to get out of this club was to go downstairs and then go out these like glass double doors. And long story short, what ended up happening is people fell down the stairs and the doors didn't open and the glass didn't break, and 21 people ended up dying.
Oh, my God.
Jeff Dedarian, he's a reporter. He's planning on doing a story on nightclub safety.
Oh, my God.
He figured, what better way? Oh, it gets so much worse. What better way to get B-roll for this reporting than to have one of his people come and record stuff at his nightclub? So Brian Butler, with a broadcast camera, was at the nightclub recording B-roll. He was going all through there was 2 bands before Great White performed. He was going on the floor recording people. People were giving, the devil horn signs. There was a number of middle fingers thrown at the camera, which wasn't going to be able to be
obligatory.
Used. Tracy King was the bouncer that was kind of escorting him through. At one point, Tracy King chased him through the crowd to kind of get this fun, wavy shot going through. Around 10:30, he set up kind of near the back of the club, looking directly at the stage because Great White was due to come on at 11, and he was going to shoot the entire act and use part of that for B-roll. At 10:30, you can see Dan Bischel placing a wooden board on the stage where he attached 4 metal broom clips, and to each clip, he snapped a cardboard tube about the size of a cigar. And these are what's called gerbs. Gerbs are the ones that shoot off the showers of sparks. Okay. So he had 2 in the middle that were going to go straight up, and 2 that were at an angle, 45-degree angle. And the goal was, and what did happen, was a 15-foot high by 30-foot wide shower of sparks that would come on right as Great White took the stage.
Okay.
And that's on camera. Brian Butler got the entire thing on camera. And I watched this video because, again, I am who I am as a person. I don't recommend it. It is not...
Oh, it's that bad, huh?
So it's not excessively graphic as far as these things go. But like I said in the beginning of this could happen to any one of us at a concert. And for that reason and that reason alone, it's horrifying. Just horrifying. There are real moments of heroism that are caught on the film as well. But it's gut-wrenching. It's really gut-wrenching. Okay. At 11 p.m., Great White's sound man, Bob Rager, starts a CD of pre-recorded Great White music. And as the music builds, the band starts to take their positions on the darkened stage. At 11:04, the light man, Scooter Stone, bumps the stage light and creates this strobe effect, signaling the beginning of the show. That's the signal for them to really start things going. At 11:05, guitar feedback starts, and Jack Russell appears on the stage with a wireless mic and starts to slam into the opening chords of Desert Moon, another one of their big songs. And Dan Beachell touches 2 wires to a battery terminal, setting off the GERD.
Pyrotechnics.
The video actually whites out at this point for about 5 seconds because it's so bright. And they work. It's 15 feet high. It's 30 feet wide. It's huge. 5 seconds after ignition, you can see small candle-sized flames on the foam corners of the drummer alcove. 15 seconds post-ignition, the GERD stop. 18 seconds post, the previously candle-sized flames are now a foot high. 20 seconds post-ignition, they're 2 feet high, and the band is still playing. They haven't noticed. 23 seconds, 23 seconds post-ignition, the flames are looking up to the ceiling of the drummer's alcove. Most of the crowd is still watching the band because they're still playing, but you can see a few people starting to turn and walk out and looking concerned. 25 seconds post-ignition, the flames are now more than 3 feet above the drummer's alcove, almost to the ceiling. 26 seconds post-ignition, smoke is now visible, filling the ceiling and coming down into the crowd on the dance floor. It's starting to billow through the club. At this point, Butler starts moving backwards, but he still has the camera pointed directly at the stage. 36 seconds post-ignition, Butler stops next to the ticket booth, shooting straight at the stage. And you can see now the stage door, that door right next to it, is wide open. And suddenly Great White stops playing. And Russell White is heard very clearly saying, "Wow, that's not good." And he doesn't sound scared. It's like so deadpan. "Wow, that's not good." 41 seconds post-ignition, you can see Russell splashing his water bottle on the flames. 50 seconds, a full 50 seconds post-ignition, the fire alarm starts to go off.
A bit of a delay.
57 seconds post-ignition, Dan Beachell is seen jumping onto the stage with a fire extinguisher. The closest fire extinguisher was at the bar, 60 feet away from the stage.
Oh, wow.
At this point, Butler appears to stop for like 8 to 10 seconds, and he is blocking the way out. Again, this is a hallway, and it leads to one door. The door is 30. The cameraman. Butler is stopped, blocking the way out. He's standing in that hallway with the camera directed to the stage, and you can see people trying to push past him and get by him, and some of them are, but he's blocking the way. This was not explicitly stated in a lot of court stuff, so I guess I should cover my butt and say maybe was blocking people, but in my personal opinion, he killed people by pausing for those 8 to 10 seconds. He waited. After that, he's out the door. The video goes on for a while longer. He walks around the building at one point. He looks in the kitchen. But one of the most just chilling and haunting moments on it is 1 minute and 52 seconds post-ignition. And at this point, he focuses briefly on the door. This is about 33 seconds after Butler left the building. Right after he left, again, this is a tilted floor. It became like dominoes. People fell on top of each other and ended up causing a pile up. And the first few times I read about this story, I read the quote that people were stacked like cordwood in the doorway. And I thought that was probably kind of an exaggeration. But after watching the video, it wasn't. People literally, when they fell down in this domino effect, they were stacked up. By the end, they were up to just a little under a foot away from the top of these double doors, just in a pile of bodies. God. People were completely stuck into it. They couldn't get out of it. By the end of this disaster, 31 bodies were found in that one entryway alone. God. It was horrific. So Mark Knott was a patrolman that was at the nightclub at this point. You actually see him on the Brian Butler video, standing at the bar with his other buddy who was there. He wasn't there for security. He was just hanging out for a minute. Right before Great White went on stage, he ended up getting a call for a domestic disturbance, and he stepped outside and he paused for a moment to kind of like shake himself off before he got in his car. And while he was standing on that front step right outside the doors, he heard a call from Anthony Betancourt, who was a police officer who was actually there for security, saying that there was a fire going on in the building. So Mark Knott immediately turned to go and open the door. And before he could get the door open, it slammed open and people started pouring out. They knocked him over that safety railing onto the hood of a car because they were coming out so fast. And he called onto the radio immediately, stampede. Just one word, stampede. So at this point, that's how the main police force and the fire department heard about it, was Anthony Betancourt saying there was a fire and then suddenly Mark Knott yelling stampede. In under 60 seconds, people reported thinking that the lights had gone out in the bar because the smoke was so thick.
God.
Anyone who didn't get out in under 90 seconds, for the most part, died. So they had 90 seconds from ignition to death.
That's not a lot of time.
That's all people had. With that, when a fire happens, when anything happens, really, and you're trying to get out, most people's gut instinct is to go to the entrance you came in. That's the entrance you know.
Yeah.
Particularly at this place. One of the entrances was in the kitchen, so most people didn't know it was there.
Mm-hmm.
The bar one was kind of hidden, and the stage one we're going to get to. That's its own discussion. So most people went to the front entrance, and that's how this pileup ended up happening. This domino effect is people falling over each other. Gina Govan was at the club because she loved Great White. She was actually a fan. She wasn't just there, to hang out with her friends. She started to head to the main door when she realized it was on fire. And when she described it later, she said the foam went up like lighting tissue paper or hay on fire. The light was completely obscured before she got to the door, and she really didn't move to it of her own accord. Within a couple of seconds of her turning towards it, the entire crowd was just pushing entirely through. Because again, this is mob mentality. This is what people do. She felt the crowd tip over like a wave, and she ended up being carried over its crest like she was body surfing and she ended up with her head and her arms outside of the actual doorway in this. And again, you can see her on the Brian Butler video. Because in the Brian Butler video, there's people literally just sticking out the door with their heads and bodies trying to get their way out of it. She ended up passing out from smoke inhalation relatively quickly. She ended up waking up a few minutes later to cold water from the fire hoses. And when the firefighters realized she was still alive, they were able to pull her body out. She was still alive. They were able to pull her out after getting a couple of people off of her. She ended up spending 6 weeks in a medically induced coma from the burns that she had, though.
Oh, God.
At this point, let's go back to that stage door. I told you we were going to get back to that.
Yeah.
The stage door was known as the band door. Now, remember, the Derderian brothers are cheap as fuck.
Yep.
They don't hire a lot of security. For a lot of their security, what they do is they just deputize barflies. They give them shirts, and they tell them, you get a... Yep. You get in for free. You get cheap beer if you are now our event security. And the band door had one rule, and one rule only. The only people who are allowed to go in and out of the band door were people with the band.
I'm with the band.
Because the band door was the door closest to the neighbors. They didn't want noise getting out. We heard a few minutes ago that it was very quick, about 25 seconds in, that the band door was open. That stage door was open after ignition. It's on fire. People are running out, clearly trying to get out of here as fast as possible. It's very clearly going up in flames. Obviously, security let people out the band door, right? There's no possible way that they turned people away.
What?
They turned multiple people away and sent them back into the club. Mike, I'm going to try and say this, Iannone knew about pyro. He knew that shit was going to go bad real quick the moment he saw those candle-sized flames. And he immediately turned to the stage door, which he knew about because he had been at this venue before. And he tried to go out that door. There was a bouncer that stopped him. They grabbed his arm. They told him this is a band-only exit and literally shoved him back into the crowd. So Mike Iannone tried to leave through the main exit. He joined hundreds of people trying to exit that one main exit and ended up in the pile-up. He ended up surviving, but he lost his hand.
Fuck.
Fred Cristonomi and Gina Russo also tried this exit, and they were blocked as well. They had to turn back to try and get out the front entrance. Gina ended up at the very bottom of the pile, and she ended up in an 11-week coma with severe burns. Fred died. Now, there's one family that I really want to mention about this door because I love these people so much. Donna and Bruce Cormiers were there with their stepkids. Donna noticed the fire first, and she looked at her husband and was like, dude, we're getting the fuck out of here. And Bruce argued for just half a second and then realized, you know what? I'm going to go with what my wife says. He picks up his son, Tim, by the collar and lifts him up the floor. Donna grabs their daughter, Brenda, and they make their way to the stage entry. They saw people being turned away, but they were like, fuck it, we're going anyway. The bouncer that was there tried to turn them away. But Papa Bear Bruce looked at this man and yelled, you fucking idiot, it's on fire, and shoved his way out past the bouncer. Absolutely.
Fucking right.
Only 24 people. Again, 462 people were there. Only 24 made it out the stage door. The stage door that was fully visible from the floor.
God.
Only 4 of them were actual band members. 12 total were people that were with other bands that had performed there before. But 24 people, only 24 people made it out that door. Jack Russell was obviously one of the people who made it out this door, and this was one of the moments when I really realized how much I hate Jack Russell.
Okay.
While in the parking lot, the entire place is on fire before it had completely burned down. There was a couple of girls who had made it out the band door as well, who shouldn't have, and they looked at Great White. One of them does, and they tell him, I've always wanted to see Great White. It's really terrible that this happened. Jack Russell looked at her and said, well, we're going to be on tour all summer. Well, the place is burning down behind him.
Jesus Christ, man.
I mean, I understand that shock is the thing, but what the fuck? What the actual fuck? Now let's turn our attention back to the atrium. The atrium, when you look at the front doors, it's on the right-hand side. That's the area that would have been the big restaurant. All of the windows, the top windows, the big windows, were made out of plexiglass, so they weren't able to be easily broken out. There was 3 little glass panels at the bottom. So the majority of the windows were plexiglass, except for 3 tiny glass panels at the bottom of these windows. However, all of the pool tables were pushed up against the windows. So these were very, very hard to access. It's just a complete...
It's a death trap.
It was a complete death trap. Only 25 people managed to make it out of these atrium windows through the bottom under the pool tables. It's not going well. So now let's turn our attention to the bar side windows. These are actually glass, and this is where a lot of the real heroism happens. Brian Butler catches a lot of this on the video. Multiple people were at those windows pulling people out from the flames. Seamus Horan was one of them. He got out the windows himself, and as soon as he got out, he turned around and started pulling people out and throwing them into the parking lot so they could survive.
Good.
Mark Knott, the patrolman, after he was knocked over and yelled stampede, he went over to those windows. He used his baton to knock them out and knock all the glass out and was pulling people out. There was a number of survivors who report being literally thrown out the windows. Just pull, pull, pull. And while this is not definitively proven, a lot of people think that it was Tracy King, the one who showed Butler around, throwing people out those windows because he was huge. This man was 6'2" and built like an absolute brick shit house. He would not have fit through the windows. But he was the kind of person who would have done that. And there's unsubstantiated, like they can't know for sure. They're pretty sure that Tracy King was the one just picking people up and throwing them out until he was eventually overcome by the fire because he was found inside. 54 people ended up escaping out of these windows. A few people escaped out of the kitchen door, including Julie Malini. She was one of the bartenders. So it's kind of odd. I think she had a moment where she couldn't think straight. She ended up grabbing her cash register drawer and running out the kitchen. She ran around to the front of the building where she met up with Jeff Jadarian, who took the cash register from her, told her to help people, and then disappeared around the back of the building.
Dick.
The next day,
God,
a cash register drawer was found tucked into the snow. He did
Empty.
do some stuff. No, the cash was still in it.
Oh.
But he went around and he hid it while the place was burning down. Like, he did end up helping. It's not like he did nothing, but like, there's some messed up priorities here.
Yeah.
Harold Hal Pansanera was at the bar during the show, so he wasn't actually on the dance floor. He was at that big horseshoe bar. He knew it was not going to be great. The area he was in filled with smoke pretty quickly, and he was pretty quickly unable to see. He ended up on the floor crawling his way through, and through sheer dumb luck, he ended up finding his way out the bar door and getting out through there. After he made it out the bar door, he called back in to see if anyone else was there that he could get to, because he really couldn't go back in because it was too much. And to his surprise, he heard someone yelling that they needed help. Thinking fast, he grabbed snowballs and started throwing them in. He threw them in like an arch until it hit this person who was stuck inside. And he guided the person out with snowballs, throwing them at this guy. So every time he got a little bit closer, and he ended up pulling him out. And he's also seen very clearly on the Butler video, carrying this person over his shoulder, shouting for a medic. Patrons who didn't escape in 90 seconds had a very small chance at survival. And I want to take a moment here to just talk about indoor fires, because until you fully understand indoor fires, I think it's hard to picture how bad it is. Because structure fires, they're horrible. Most of what we know about fires are campfires or our fireplaces. There's something that's soothing. There's something that makes us happy. It lulls us into a false sense of security. So a lot of times in these structure fires, people think they have a lot of time because fire is something we know, right? This one was particularly bad, but structure fires in general can go bad really, really quickly. Fire almost always results in the formation of water vapor. It's taking oxygen. There's a lot of hydrogen in the air, and those combine to make water, which is too hot to be actual water. So it becomes steam. So it creates water vapor. It's boiling the air, literally. Now, when you do your fire in your fireplace, you feel it as a dry heat because all of that water vapor and smoke goes right up the chimney. That doesn't happen in a structure fire. That stays inside. All of these little particles that are in the air stay inside, and they stay in that room. And one of the best ways to kind of visualize this is how fast a sauna changes when you throw water on the rocks. It goes from feeling dry to kind of almost oppressive. On top of this, you have smoke in the air that kind of billows and stuck to the ceiling at first. That smoke is filled with gases that can eventually ignite if they get hot enough. And it also is filled with little particles of not totally burned whatever. So that smoke layer can and will catch on fire if it gets hot enough. When that smoke layer catches on fire, it's what's called rollover. And it literally rolls over the ceiling. It rolls through the room. It moves at like 10 to 15 feet per second.
Oh my God.
So you can't outrun it. So the whole ceiling burns. And in the case of the nightclub fire, you've got one wall completely on fire. And when rollover happened, you've got the ceiling on fire. And it's so hot that both of them are acting like a microwave. They're heating everything in the room between the water vapor and just the heat radiating off of it. And this happens in structure fires in general. If rollover isn't stopped, isn't halted in its tracks, it will eventually cause what's called flashover. And flashover is when the radiant heat gets so hot that literally everything in that heat bowl catches on fire.
Like spontaneous combustion.
I mean, it's not spontaneous, but yes, it just catches on fire. The fire may be on the ceiling, but suddenly the entire room, everything in it, all the hair, all the clothes, all the wood, everything that can burn is now on fire. And that is exactly what happened in the Station Club. Rollover for the entire club happened in about 90 seconds. Rollover in the drummer's alcove happened in under 60 seconds. That atrium area that we talked about that had the plexiglass windows, there was very little air coming into that area. So once that area hit rollover, it was 10 seconds from rollover to flashover, which is why so many people died in that area. But in the front entryway, a lot of people ended up surviving that pileup because there was fresh air coming in through the doors. So rollover didn't become flashover quite as quickly in the front entryway. But that's why structure fires are so dangerous. One of many reasons, because of the way those things are set up, it's significantly more dangerous than your fireplace fire. And I don't want to say it's more dangerous than a wildfire, but it acts differently than an outdoor fire.
Yeah.
Brian Butler wasn't the only one who recorded this incident. This is 2003. So this is not quite the era of cell phones. We're still in Blackberries and Palm Pilots. But Walkmans and digital cameras, very much a thing. There's a couple of really notable recordings. The first one that I wanted to talk about was Matthew Pickett. Matthew Pickett brought his Walkman to the concert, presumably to kind of bootleg what's going on.
Yep.
He died in the fire, but his Walkman was recovered with his body and given back to his family.
Really?
2 years after the disaster is when his family finally opened the bag from the funeral director, and they found this Walkman. They brought it to the police, and the police were able to piece it back together and make it play.
Really?
I didn't listen to this. I couldn't find it. And to be honest, I didn't look that hard because this is not one I want to listen to. From every description I've had, it's absolutely haunting. From the beginning chords of Desert Moon through people screaming and calling for help to it apparently ends with it sounding just like a crackling fireplace.
Oh, God.
And no other sounds. Yeah. He was with his buddy, Joe Christina, who did survive. On the Walkman tape, you can hear Matthew urging Joe to take a picture because this is crazy. Take a picture of what's going on. And Joe does. And the photo is also just haunting. You can see the entire stage on fire. It looks like a fireball. But what's really haunting about it is dead center in the frame is a man standing there with a cigarette in one hand and a beer in the other hand, looking like he doesn't have a care in the world.
What?
The man was Jeff Rader. And I mean, again, shock is a thing. And I don't know, no one can know what he was thinking and what was going through his mind at that point. But he was far enough away that he absolutely could have made it to the open stage door that you know is there about 15 feet away. It's not visible in the picture, but you know it's there. And that if he had just turned the other direction and made it past the bouncer, he could have survived, but he didn't. He tried to make it out the front, and his body was found in that front entryway.
God.
I'm not religious, but this next bit that I'm going to tell you was an absolute fucking miracle. About an hour after all of the hose streams from the firefighters stopped, after they thought everyone was gone, everyone who had survived had been found, everyone who didn't was in the building, the policemen and firefighters started to try and detangle the bodies that were stacked up and burned together in the front entryway. And while they were doing this, a hand suddenly shot out of the bottom of the pile and grabbed one of the firefighters' boots.
God, that made me crap myself.
The man was Raul Vargas. When the dominoes started, he ended up on the very bottom of the pile, but he ended up on his side in the fetal position. So he wasn't asphyxiated like some of the other people were. And he somehow had a clear stream of air coming through between the bodies, so he was able to breathe. And he survived. He survived with only minor injuries. He had very, very minor burns. He actually went home from the hospital the next day.
That's wild.
He went back to the station the day after, right after he got released to the hospital, after they had cleared out most of the bodies from that front entryway, and he went to look at where he was on the bottom of the pile, which was this it was red tile. And he said when he went to go look, the red tile was completely blackened except for a little heart shape where his body had been. I have no explanation. I know science is weird, but this is one of those things that I don't understand. And it gives me hope for the world. Someone survived that. It's a miracle that he survived. I don't understand it. And I wanted to end the death and dying with that, because what an amazing story of survival. He got so unbelievably lucky.
And there's always one.
There is. So now I'm going to make you really sad again. Before we get into some of the other things, I wanted to talk a bit about burns. There are 4 different degrees of burns. The first kind of burn is called a first-degree burn. That's like a sunburn. When you go out and you stay out too long. It doesn't blister. It's just red, raised. It's kind of itchy. It hurts, but it's not too bad. It doesn't really require any help. Then you've got second-degree burns. This is like if you touch a hot pan or if you stay out in the sun too long that your skin starts to blister. These are the most painful kind of burns because the nerve endings aren't killed, but they are tortured.
Yep.
Then you've got third-degree burns. Third-degree burns are all the way through the skin. It kills the nerves, kills the hair follicles. It requires skin grafts, but it doesn't go as deep as muscle or bone. And then you've got fourth-degree burns. Fourth-degree burns are all the way through the skin, muscle, sometimes into bone. These are obviously the absolute worst kind of burns. They usually, or I should say often, require amputation, especially if they're in places where the skin is pretty thin, like your hands or your feet. That's what happened to Mike Iannosi, the one who was turned away from the door. His hand got so burned they had to have it amputated. There was quite a few people that had third and fourth degree burns in this fire that were pulled out because, again, it just happened so fast. And when they were pulling people out of that pile, they did get people out of the pile, but they burned so quickly that they ended up with these third and fourth degree burns. Kalamazoo Inn across the street became a field hospital. And now that we know a lot of these burns, a lot of people were really confused because the people who were screaming the most were some of the last people to be sent to the hospital.
Because they only had
second degree burns. People who have third and fourth degree burns, it doesn't hurt that much. The burns themselves don't anyway, because your nerve endings are gone. They're dead. And people were a little bit confused about it, but that's what happened. Peter Gennady was a 20-year firefighter, and he was one of the people completely in charge of triaging folks there. And he talked about some of his most enduring memories was, while there were some people who were really confused, there was a lot of people who were like, look, there's people who are more hurt than me. Go and help them first, but please don't forget about me. And he reassured each of them that he wouldn't forget about them. But he was asked that repeatedly, just don't forget about me. It's okay to go help them, but don't forget about me. And I thought that was a really sweet recognition of the moment. In a testament to how well he ran that, no one ended up dying at the triage center or in transit to the hospitals.
Nice, good work.
And I know sometimes there's things outside of your control, but it says a lot that absolutely no one died in triage or in the ambulances. Kent County Hospital ended up going through a 3-month supply of morphine, though, in that one night.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. There were 96 people who died at the scene 4 who died later from their injuries, 100 total, with 230 injured. 64 children under the age of 18 lost one or both of their parents. So while all of this triage is happening and the firefighters are over there at the Station Nightclub, and just to give you an idea of how tough of a night it had been snowing for a couple of weeks and was still snowing. The ground was so cold that the water from the fire hoses ended up freezing on the ground, and the pressure from the fire hoses ended up pushing engine number 1 down a hill a little bit, and it ran into ladder engine number 1. No one was hurt, but it was not going well. It took them about, they counted rescue time as 40 minutes. And the reason they counted it as that is only because Raul Vargas was pulled out at about 40 minutes, a little under an hour after the flames started.
Okay.
Recovery, though, lasted until about noon the next day. And this was bad. This was a bad recovery. In a lot of cases like this, they will set up little psychological stations for firefighters and first responders who are doing recovery efforts to try and help make sure that they don't go through too much trauma, to try and help with kind of limiting PTSD as much as possible. They'll set them up in groups. In this case, they were trying to ensure that each firefighter only had to recover one body. Of course, it didn't end up working out that way. There was far more bodies than they expected. They were only supposed to go in so many times, recover one body, come out, go to this little tent and get help. However, there was no such psychological help set up for the one and only medical examiner who showed up.
Oh, no.
Jay Kingston was one of the medical examiners for this area. And again, there's not many. This is not a huge area. His boss, flat out, didn't show up to crime scenes. So he was the only one there. He helped with every single one of the 96 bodies. And this is a fire. I mean, any recovery is going to be horrific, but in a fire, you have things like skin slippage, which is where the skin is literally sliding off the body. In this one, the heat was so fast and so strong that bodies were fused to each other, to the ground, to the walls. They had to literally pry them off of each other.
Oh, my God.
And making things even more difficult, this was pretty much immediately a media sensation. So there were helicopters flying all over. There was press trying to get as close as they could. At one point, one helicopter flew just a bit too low and ended up blowing all the body bags open with all of the remains inside of them. And it was quickly...
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Fuck off with that. What?
Well, they immediately made it a no-fly zone after that happened. And they pushed the press back even further. But, this was not an easy recovery. It was not easy in any shape or form. So that is the disaster portion of the Station Nightclub fire.
Oh, now for the stuff that's really going to make me mad, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, how you feeling? You feeling good?
Yeah, I'm all right. That's horrific.
Not for long!
It's horrific. And those poor people.
I mean, it's what really gets me about this one, really about any structure fire, and I'm sure we're going to do a lot more, is just how fast and furious it is. Now, the nightclub fire was faster than most, but not by a ton. It was a bad one. And it was completely and totally preventable.
Yeah.
There was so many pieces of this puzzle that if just one of them wasn't there, everything probably would have been fine. We've already talked about the foam. We've already talked about the occupancy. I also wanted to mention there were...
Fire marshal needs to do his damn job.
There were no fire sprinklers in the building.
Of course not.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology investigated this fire, and they found that if there had been sprinklers, the fire would have been put out in under 2 minutes, and air conditions never would have become unlivable. Rollover wouldn't have happened. None of this real disaster would have happened. Now, that's not to say there would have been no injuries and no deaths, but it definitely would not have been this bad. Now, the reason why they didn't have fire sprinklers is because the building was built before fire sprinklers were required, and it was considered grandfathered in. However, back to our friendly fire marshal, the Fire Code of Rhode Island stipulates that buildings are only grandfathered in as long as they maintain the same use and occupancy.
Oh, and this definitely did not.
Yeah, nope. In 1969, it had a capacity of 50. In 1981, its capacity was 161. In 1991, it was 225. In the beginning of 1999, it was 268. And again, by February 2000, it was 404. I think the occupancy has changed.
Just a little.
While it started as a World War II bar, it also went through iterations of a restaurant, so the use obviously changed. The sprinkler system should have been installed.
100%.
The fire marshal should have insisted on it, but he didn't. So just to go back through it all, of the list of things we have, that really any one of them would have made a huge difference. There was illegal use of pyro that was completely unsuited to the venue. There was completely improper use of soundproofing insulation, both what Julian put on, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Well, Julian's stuff is actually what made it so much worse, which we're going to talk about in just a minute.
Oh, okay.
And then, obviously, the egg crate that the Dederian brothers put in. There was significant overcrowding. There was a complete absence of safety devices like sprinklers or, fire extinguishers near the stage, not 60 feet away.
Right.
Complete lack of training for club employees because, you probably shouldn't turn people away from a door when a building is on fire.
Yep.
Issuance of inflated maximum building capacity by the fire inspector, non-enforcement of fire codes, and the design of the entryway with a pinch point.
Yep.
All of these things, if any one of them had been different, the death toll would have been maybe not nothing, but significantly less. On a side note, the chief fire inspector, the chief fire marshal, Irving J. Owens, came to the fire relatively quickly after it happened to kind of do the inspection. However, 10 hours before the fire started, he was in the middle of doing an interview with a Rhode Island reporter.
Okay.
They were talking about the February 17th the February 17th nightclub disaster, the same reason that Brian Butler was there.
Okay.
And he told the reporter, again, 10 hours before this fire, that it's very rare that something like this would happen here. Our fire codes would prevent it.
Oh.
On his way to start doing the inspection and everything of the fire itself, he called that reporter and told him, I guess we spoke too soon.
I mean, he's not wrong.
Yeah. The Dederian brothers obviously took no responsibility. I think none of us are shocked by this.
Not shocked at all.
The morning after the fire, 5 hours after it happened, they were on the news giving an interview, and they said, one of them said, at no time did I or my brother authorize or okay the use of pyro by the band Great White. Again, pyro was used there all the time. There's a number of things that point to them giving explicit permission, but even if it wasn't explicit, there was definitely implicit permission. During a lot of the trials during a lot of the stuff that came up in the legal actions, they talked about how, we were always looking at the stage. So if people used pyro, we just didn't see it. Sure. Yep.
It's kind of noticeable.
A little noticeable. You weren't always in the back
nightclub
when the pyro was happening. Come on, guys. The fire department and marshals also took no responsibility. During the initial inquiry, one of the fire chiefs said, our inspector missed nothing. They, meaning the station, were in compliance.
Bullshit.
Absolute bullshit. So people are pissed. They're calling for absolute heads at this point.
As they should.
7 days after the fire, AG Patrick Lynch impaneled a grand jury. And the goal was to prosecute 3 people. Dan Beachel, Jeff Dederian, and Michael Dederian. Just those 3. Now, a grand jury is interesting because a grand jury can actually bring charges.
The first guy, what was his name?
Dan Beachel. He was the road manager who set off the pyro.
Okay, but not the fire marshal.
Not the fire marshal.
Who okayed all this
not
bullshit.
Jack Rushlow. No one else. Just those 3 people, which those 3 people are definitely guilty.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. But only those 3. During this grand jury, which lasted about 10 months, the grand jury asked multiple times to hear more from LaRoque. And they were basically told to, LaRoque is the fire marshal who didn't do anything.
Yeah.
He testified. And this is where he told everyone that I didn't see the phone. That's why I didn't say anything about it. And the grand jury wanted to ask him more questions. They tried, but the AG really wouldn't let them. He couldn't stop the grand jury from asking questions, but he told LaRoque to just quote citations and different things from the fire code instead of answering.
What?
Super, super awesome. We're going to talk a bit more about why that probably is, but it was not super great.
But the AG on trial too?
At the very end of the grand jury, when they were asked if they wanted to question anyone more, they said they wanted to question LaRoque. When they were asked if they had any questions, they asked if they could bring criminal charges against LaRoque, and they weren't given a straight answer. During his testimony, he claimed he didn't see the phone, even though he had to reach through the damn door reached through the foam for the door. He was never asked how he could designate an entire building as standing room only.
Yeah, that's a good question.
There's a couple reasons why Patrick Lynch probably didn't want to pursue this. Number one, he's a political creature. He probably didn't want to prosecute someone in uniform, especially somebody who is going to run for more political offices. Going after somebody in uniform, especially in an area we can kind of guess from this and what we've talked about. We haven't gone into a ton of detail. But Rhode Island at this time in particular was really kind of known for corruption. You scratch my back, I scratch your back.
Yeah, I was getting that impression.
Yeah, and that likely played a huge role. But another thing is fire marshals are, in Rhode Island laws, exempt from being prosecuted as the result of their calls.
Oh, that's some bullshit.
Well, no, the reason why that exists is because they don't want fire marshals being sued because a business went under after they shut them down for violating safety code.
I mean,
there's a good reason
sense
for it, but it's written very broadly that it could potentially be interpreted that he can't be held liable for not holding things up to code. I think it's kind of bullshit, but it is something that exists in the code, and I can see some of the logic behind that. By the end, 3 people were indicted. Dan Bichel and the Dederian brothers. Right. They didn't go to trial. All of them pled out.
Okay.
Super great. Dan Bichel ended up pleading guilty against strenuous objections from his attorneys. He pled guilty to 100 counts of involuntary manslaughter. By all accounts, he is the only one who actually felt bad. He clearly felt awful about what happened.
Clearly, yeah.
By all accounts, Dan Bichel did everything he could to try and stop what was happening and to save people. At his sentencing, I actually watched his statement. Mm-hmm. You could feel how awful he felt. And not that that makes it any better. While he was in prison, he sent handwritten notes to every single family affected by the tragedy, expressing his sincere remorse. That's a lot of time.
That is.
People didn't love his sentence. He was sentenced to 15 years. He pled guilty to 100 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Each count could be 15 years. They can be served one at a time. It could have been a life sentence. He was sentenced to 15 years total.
Okay.
11 years of that was suspended. So only 4 years of time to serve. When you have however much time to serve, if you're eligible for parole, you're eligible for parole before the end of your serve time. So he got out after 16 months.
Oh.
He only served 16 months in prison. The Dederian brothers, Michael Dederian pled no contest, which is effectively guilty, but it doesn't actually claim guilt. It's a thing that people can do. To 100 counts of involuntary manslaughter. He was also sentenced to 15 years, 11 of which were suspended. He served 27 months. Jeff Dederian pled no contest to 100 counts. He was sentenced to 10 years, all of which were suspended. So he essentially just got parole. He served no prison time whatsoever.
Jeff Dederian, was he the rich one?
No, he was the reporter.
He's the reporter, okay.
Yeah, no prison time whatsoever. To make matters worse, the judge decided what the Dederian brothers' sentence was going to be before the sentencing.
What?
He chose it. He decided. He knew, after deciding what it was going to be, that people were going to be pissed. So he actually sent a letter to all of the families before the sentencing explaining what the sentence was going to be and why he had decided that.
That's not legal.
But that's what he did. The attorney general was going to send a letter after the judge, essentially saying, I think he's wrong. They should serve more time, blah, blah, blah. But that letter, the AG's letter, ended up getting leaked before the judge's letter came. So what people heard about, they heard on the news that the Dederian brothers, one of them was only going to get 4 years of serve time. The other one was going to serve no time. And that the attorney general was pissed about it. They heard about it on the news instead of getting the letters. So people were pissed.
Oh, man.
Pissed.
I would be too.
At a sentencing, when there are victims of a crime, there is a part of the sentencing where families are allowed to make statements to whoever the defendant is. Mm-hmm. These letters, this leaking happened before the sentencing. So people showed up to those family statements pissed. Judge Darrigan was ready for it. He told everyone they were not allowed to comment on what the sentence was. They weren't allowed to complain about it. They had to restrict their comments only to how the deaths or injuries of their loved ones affected them.
Oh.
Yeah, the families did not love it. One family member started his whole thing with justice is not being served. And Judge Darrigan cut him off, declared a recess. And when they came back, he told him directly that he needed to keep his comments only to the effect of the victims' deaths. That's it. Nothing else. This guy ignored the fuck out of the judge and just kept going to loud applause in the courtroom. The mother of John Longageru, who perished in the disaster, said, "We've been given a life sentence with no opportunity for parole. We all deserve a trial to find out why our loved ones died. A trial would not have been too hard for us. I think it would have been too hard for you, Judge, and for Mr. Lynch." Gina Russo.
Damn right.
Gina Russo was one of the ones who got turned away at that stage door and ended up in the pileup, and she was in an 11-week coma. Gina Russo spoke at this. She said, "You have done us a great disservice by not allowing a trial. This is my life sentence." Super not great. Now, these are my own personal thoughts, but I think this is another case of corruption. This was the best case scenario for Patrick Lynch, the Attorney General, who again wanted to run for office. If he had taken them to trial and lost, it would have been awful for him. If he had taken them to trial, there's a really good chance that other shit that the fire marshals had done would have come up. He probably didn't want to fight too hard, and he knew the Dadarian brothers would fight back pretty hard if they got an extreme sentence. By doing it this way and blaming it entirely on the judge, he got the best of both worlds. He got to be able to say, I think the judge was wrong. He should have sentenced them to more, but also didn't have to deal with any of the fallout of having to actually work for a larger sentence. Again, these are my own personal opinions, but it really, it worked out for Patrick Lynch far better than just about any other scenario would have. To make matters even worse for the families, the Dadarian brothers, even in their statements, because after the family statements, the defendant gets to say something.
Right.
Their statements were not nearly what Dan Beachel's were. Dan Beachel felt bad. You could tell the Dadarian brothers didn't. One of them said they were sorry for all of the heartache resulting from this tragedy. That takes no responsibility. Not sorry for what they did, not sorry for their part in this, just sorry for what happened.
Asshole.
They said, we realize the business we owned has caused so much heartache and loss. Again, not them, the business that they owned. I'm going to remind you before I say this, that Jeff did not just one, but 2 reports on fire safety, one of which talked about polyurethane foam. He said in his statement, I wish I knew how deadly and toxic it really was regarding the foam.
You had only done 2 reports on it, you jackass.
Well, he did 1 report on the foam, 2 reports on fire safety, but he did a whole report on how much of a fire hazard foam was, this particular type of foam. He also said, this one makes me so mad, there are many days when I wish I didn't make it out of that building, because if I didn't, maybe some of the families would feel better. To those families, I'm sorry that I did make it out. I know you would have liked it if I died.
What?
Right? Like, it just, Michael also said, we fully accept as business owners that we should not have relied on other people. These men were charming, but that's it. That's all they did. Jeff didn't serve any time. Nothing at all. He only did 500 hours of community service. And Michael only served 27 months.
For those statements alone, they should have got time. God damn.
Jack Russell was never charged. Fire Marshal LaRoque was never charged. There was never a criminal trial. Yeah, these families, it was this big disservice. Then came the civil lawsuits, and this took years. The book Killer Show is actually written by one of the attorneys, one of 50 attorneys that helped do all of this class action civil lawsuits. I have never in my life enjoyed reading about torts so much as I did reading this book. This guy is fucking hilarious and does such a good job of describing it. But to kind of narrow it down, there was a lot of lawsuits. There was a lot of blogs, because this is 2003. WordPress was the thing, about how dumb it was that they were suing everyone. But really, the 3 main people who are very clearly liable had no money. So they sued everyone they could. They sued Anheuser-Busch. They sued the TV corporation that Jeff Dadarian and Brian Butler worked for. They sued the phone company. They sued everyone. There were no trials, ultimately. Pretty much everyone settled. Yeah. And they ended up getting $176 million in change. Okay. To kind of give you an idea of some of them, Anheuser-Busch, so Budweiser, settled for $5 million. The LIN Television Corp., which is where Brian Butler worked, settled for $30 million. The town of West Warwick settled for $10 million. The state of Rhode Island, $10 million. Jack Russell settled for $1 million. And the reason it was only $1 million,
that's all.
Well, that was his insurance policy. Didn't even come from him. Came from his insurance policy. Derco LLC, which is the Dedarian brothers, $813,000. Again, that's all they had in their insurance policy. The American Phone Company, $6.3 million. And then I want to talk about Sealed Air Corp, $25 million.
Sealed Air.
Do you remember the white foam that Julian installed?
Yeah, you said the stuff was kind of like pool noodles?
It was kind of like pool noodles. In the initial inquiry behind the disaster, they couldn't quite tell why it stayed on fire for as long as it did, why it burned the way it did. It didn't make a ton of sense. It made enough that they were able to get through it. But it wasn't until the civil lawsuit where they really started looking into this that they figured out that the reason the fire was able to burn as long and as hot as it did was because of that white foam. That white foam that Julian installed was a foam that Sealed Air Corp designed. It couldn't catch on fire very easily. However, once it did, it burned for a longer time. The egg crate foam, if it was just the egg crate foam, it would have burned out really quickly and probably wouldn't have caused rollover. But because the egg crate foam was on top of that white foam, it burned enough to catch the white foam on fire, and the white foam burned long enough.
Oh, God.
And they were able to prove this. And this was one of my favorite parts of the book. They used this, I forget the name of it, but a fire research company. And the author of Killer Show talked about how he would happily pay them money to let him work there so that he could just go burn things for a living. And it was so funny the way he wrote it. I highly recommend everyone read this book because you never knew that you would enjoy torts until you read Killer Show. They figured this out, and they were able to eventually trace back who made this white foam that, again, Julian found in a fucking dumpster. And then the company, Sealed Air, they sued him really quick because they had 3 years. They had to sue within 3 years of the statute of limitations passed. In discovery, Sealed Corp gave a bunch of like paperwork and whatnot to kind of prove that it wasn't them. Okay. And one of the things they put out was they really pushed that their foam was recyclable and reusable. You could reuse it over and over and over again. And with that, they were able to prove that there was a reasonable expectation that they could use this, even though they found it in the dumpster. And because they had advertised it that way, they were also liable for this, which I just thought was really interesting.
Okay.
None of the foam was ever advertised as flammable. In fact, most foam today is still not advertised as flammable because this foam is still being sold. It's still out there on the market. You can still buy it. It's still advertised as soundproofing quality, but it's not advertised as flammable. And the reason why, there's something called the Steiner tunnel test. The Steiner tunnel test is where they take this like horizontal tunnel, they do a line of whatever it is in there, they set it on fire, and much like the flame test that we talked about before, depending on how far it burns, determines whether or not it's considered flammable. In the case of these foams, when it's burning horizontally, it doesn't burn that fast.
It's when it burns vertical.
It's been proven again and again that this test does not mimic how these things act in actual fire conditions, particularly when they're vertical. But it is not considered an outdated test. They're allowed to use this and allowed to use it as a way to prevent marketing their foam as flammable. So if you ever need to soundproof anything, be real cautious.
Yeah,
be real careful.
Thinking about like making this a booth for a podcast,
right?
I'm rethinking the materials I'm going to use.
I was fully thinking the same thing while I was reading about that, because we've been talking about different ways to kind of soundproof to make the sound quality better. We're going to have to be real careful. I'm going to be real intense about what foam we get. Gotta be real. So to end it out, let's talk about Jack Russell.
Let's finish it up. About it.
Jack Russell, Great White reunited in 2006.
All right.
And then they kicked Jack out in 2009 for substance abuse problems. And I feel for him because I feel like he went through something horrible too, but he consistently showed like no remorse. He consistently didn't seem to care that much. So I don't know how bad I feel for him becoming
just
an
another
alcoholic.
gig, and it was a bummer that it didn't work.
They're going to be touring all summer. Doesn't matter. It's fine.
Yeah.
In 2008, he ended up having a facelift and had it recorded and filmed and put out on the internet.
What?
To, quote, improve his self-esteem.
What?
Yep.
Oh my God.
In 2015, he sat down for an interview and he talked about the breakup. One of the things he said was, "It was horrible. It was the worst experience of my life."
Not, your show.
Yep.
killing.
No.
Oh,
The worst experience of his life was the breakup in 2009. I would rather sit in a hospital with a colostomy bag on, which I did. Everyone was fake. Nobody likes me. And you can tell they were just hanging around me because I make them money. I want to point out again, this man couldn't afford to pay his dentist $160. He couldn't even make himself money, much less other people money. Yeah.
He sounds like a real peach.
In the same article, he was talking about why they kicked him out. He also said, I get it. I was a mess. I wouldn't want to be around me either. I don't blame, but I don't get why they don't like me now. I don't understand why they still hold a grudge. Try me, right?
Probably because you're a self-centered prick.
Yep. He really seemed horrified at the thought of a reunion. When asked about it, he said, I would never, 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 never over my dead body. They would have to kill me, prop me up with a stick up my butt. It'll never happen. There's not enough money in the world. He ended up making a documentary called Guest List in 2022 about the Station Club fire. It was one of the first times he spoke out with guilt. And I tried, and maybe I'm wrong, but I could not find any evidence that the proceeds of this went towards the victims at all.
Oh.
On the flip side, we have Mark Kendall, who was the only other original Great White member. Mm-hmm. He remains in contact with many of the families to this day. He really did help all of them, worked really hard to make sure they were okay, stuck around, you know. He seems like a decent guy.
Okay.
Jack Russell died in August of this year, 2024.
Oh.
Of Lewy body dementia.
What's that?
So he is no more. I don't know. But he died of it.
It was fatal.
Dead and gone now. So that's it. That's my Station Club fire.
That was a story.
It's a big one. And I feel like all of the fire disasters are really, those ones get me hard. And they're all kind of repetitive, to be honest. I'm still probably going to do a bunch of them. But fires they're horrific, especially structure fires. Structure fires scare me more than wildfires.
Oh my God. You were talking about like people being fused together. Like, good God.
This is why I stay near the exit. And this is,
I hear you.
You know, a point where we can all learn something too, that it's really human nature to go out the door you came in. Don't do that. Go out the other door.
Mark your exits when you enter.
Mark your exits and go out a different door than you came in. Because everyone goes out the front door. And so many times, I mean, we're going to go over some other stampedes and pileups that happen. Because this is way more common than you want to know. Where people stampede and they just...
When you first said that the other door by the stage opened inward,
yep.
I thought that was coming. I thought there was a stampede coming.
I mean, there was, just a different door.
Crushed up against the door that wasn't opening the right way.
The stage door was way worse than that, though.
Yeah.
The people turning them away. And that's the other thing with this disaster that always gets me. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this as our first fire is there are so many pieces to the Station Club fire. It would be bad enough if it just burned down because of bad pyro and foam. But people, they turned them away. And I'm not going to name names, but they know which bouncers turned people away at the door. There's a report from one of the people who was turned away. She was at a reunion for the fire survivors, and she ended up face to face with the bouncer.
Oh, God.
Away. And she did not realize who it was until that moment. She recognized his face, and she was so shocked she ended up falling over.
God.
There was two of them, and we know who they were. I'm not going to name their names because I don't think they deserve the notoriety. But they're alive, they're well, they're still in West Warwick, and they fucking show up to the reunions.
Fucking dick.
One of their wives died in the fire.
You know, my hero, though, is
Bruce!
The dad who just...
Papa Bear!
Told him to get the fuck out of the way and shoved him out the way.
You fucking idiot! The place is on fire!
Common sense. Yep. And then shove him out the way and get your family out.
Get those babies out of there. Those are my thoughts. Do you have anything else you want to teach people? Anything else you want to tell people?
Oh, man. No, just...
He's like, no, I'm scared.
Don't line your buildings with foam.
I'm taking Aaron to a couple events in the next couple of weeks. I'll tell you all. I'll report back on how many exits he clocks and tells the kids about.
No, we're going to start checking, with the fire marshals before we go to places.
If it makes you feel any better, I walk into just about every big crowded venue that we go into and I clock all the exits and I look around for random shit because I read way too much. I would know if there was foam on the walls. I got you.
Awesome.
So on that note, we are so happy you guys joined us. If you liked what you heard, We would really love it if you would leave us a rating and a review. We have socials. We are just about everywhere. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on TikTok. I post a lot of On This Day and catastrophes. They have a lot of fun with those.
I love those.
Our email is catastrophichroniclespod@gmail.com. And if you want to see the show notes, it's at www.catastrophe-chronicles.com. And last but not least, if you would like to help us financially support the pod and help us pay for like our podcasting hosts and things like that, we have a tip jar set up for PayPal. Throw some stuff in there if you want to. Absolutely no obligation. We love you no matter what. And with that,
stay safe, everyone.
And stay curious.